We were able to visit the Temple Mount this trip and also see the Wailing Wall. Here's some pictures of the western side of the temple itself. A sign above the security checkpoint, and then on our way we were able to look down at the Wailing Wall. There's the men's side and the women's side.
Usually we do the explanations in a chronological order from the ancient times to the modern times. But this is an exception. We'll do from the modern time to the ancient time, all right? Just to explain to you what all this excitement is all about. And we need to begin why such a nice, pleasant, peace-loving group of Christians from Seattle been frisked so carefully, first by the Israeli police and then by the Muslim police. What are they looking for? What do you think? What are they what's the idea? Why would they do it? Okay, the idea is this, that the Muslims are afraid that you will try to undermine the Muslim authority here, or the Muslim presence here, according to you Christian theology. They don't know much about it, but they think that you need to bring the Messiah quickly, right? Jesus quickly. And in order to do that, the Antichrist must rule, and he must rule from the temple that must be built. That's what they think you think. Okay? They never attended Pastor Steve classes on eschatology, and I wish they did. So they would have a better idea on what's going on. But that's what they think. They think that some Christians might have an idea that the kingdom must be taken by force. And how is this can be exercised here? By building the temple. How do you do that? How do you build a temple if there's a mosque here? What do you do first?
Tear it down.
Yes. You remove the building. Can we call it this way? We remove the present building and you build a new building. Okay. So that's by force. Okay. And that's what the both Muslims and the Israeli police is afraid of. Why would the Israeli police be afraid of that? Well, let me tell you that 75% of the Jewish people in Israel are secular. They don't care about what's going on here. On the contrary, when this place, it was in Jordan, it was occupied by the Jordanians in 1948. Okay, and it was under the Jordanian rule in 1967. And when Israeli General Moshe Dayan conquered it in 1967 war, he said, another victory like this and I'm broke. He did not know what to do with that. Okay, because what would you like to do if you were Moshe Dayan, an Israeli general at this time, the chief of staff?
Eradicated of all Muslims.
Well, that's exactly why they searched you, though, Mr. Martin. Okay, that's exactly the reason they searched you, because that's what they think you would do. Now, he had no intention to do that, because he was not a religious Jew. The state of Israel is the secular state. They don't care about that. On the contrary, they don't want to provoke the Muslim reaction. Plus, consider this, that we have today 20% of our population Muslims. How can you destroy the holy site in a democracy of the Western type? How can you do that? You can't. You legally cannot do that. So if you cannot do anything, you don't want to do anything, you don't know what to do, what do you do?
Nothing.
Nothing. This nothing is called the status quo. In other words, you preserve what was there before. Right? You preserve, you freeze. And what was here before is the Muslim Muslim mosque. All that is a Muslim complex. Since when? Since the 7th century. Now, is it a long time or a short time? Oh, a long time. It's definitely a long time. So that's why, by Israeli law, we agreed to preserve it the way it is. Okay? And
He didn't have access to the Western Wall.
hold on a second, we'll come to the Western Wall just a second. We agreed to preserve it the way it is, i.e., where the Muslims are should be Muslim, where the Jews are at the Western Wall should be Jewish. Okay? And the Israeli government and Israeli police must make sure that it functions the way it is, that it is not used for any other worship purposes. That is why Will's Bible was confiscated. You can see the logic now why they do that, because they're afraid that Will read something from the Bible, or whatever, even shake it up in the air, and that will be the sign that he does not agree with the status quo, with the way it is today, with the Muslim authority. Okay, and if he publicly expressed this, that's breaking the agreement, breaking the law. Okay, so that's why the police says no. All right, that's from the Israeli perspective. So most of the people of Israel that are secular don't even want to come here. Okay, what about the religious Jewish people, the Orthodox, the observant Jewish people? Have you seen the sign when you came in that said, by the religious law, you are not allowed to come up here? What's the reason for that? If you are an observant Jew, you would know that this place 2,000 years ago functioned as the Jewish temple, and it was divided into certain sections, and the Jews were allowed to the certain sections and were not allowed to other sections. Can you name me, for example, one section that nobody was allowed but one person? For example, all right, to the place called holy, only the priests were, the Kohanim, the priests were allowed. All right, and I'm not a Kohen, I'm not a priest, I'm not from the priestly family, and I might, because I don't know exactly where it was, I might step in to the areas that I'm not supposed to. Plus, I can put my life in danger going through all this hassle. All right? So that's why the chief rabbis say, don't even go there. Okay, so most of the religious Jewish people don't come here. All right? Again, you might have a preconception that all Jews are really eager and ready to build this temple. That's what they're looking for every day, every moment of their life. Well, no, not really. Not even religious Jews are having this idea. There's a small group that are called the Zealots. We learned about this group when we were at Masada. Okay? And they think what they think you think. That the kingdom must be taken by force. And like at Masada, where we were, right, that they challenged the Roman rule, they want to challenge whatever rule it is here, right? Whether it's Jewish, by the way, police, or Muslim police or whatever, they want to challenge that and say, we need to build a temple, and by doing this, we will prompt, hasten the coming of the Messiah. For them, it's the first time.
Yeah, there you go.
The Bible tells us the sacrifice of Isaac on hill or Mount Moriah or Moriah, and that's this. Okay, that's this. Moriah, that's this. Okay.
One thing. So we started in Beersheba, remember? That's where he packed up the donkey and the wood and the servants and took his son. This is where he ended up.
So we have two elements. He ended up here. We have two stories with the sacrifice of Isaac and the meeting of Melchizedek, the king of Jerusalem, somewhere here as well. So those are two stories from the days of Abraham, which is roughly 4,000 years ago. 4,000 years ago. All right, so Abraham, and hence our connection to this. Then we mentioned today, in our devotion today, about David purchasing the threshing floor. Right? That's what we read the passage today. David purchased a threshing floor, and that will be where the mosque is today. The threshing floor. The threshing floor. Okay. And this is where David brought his ark. He brought the ark. And then Solomon built the temple. Okay, Solomon built the temple that lasted for 500 years on this hill. 500 years, and was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians. Okay, the Babylonians destroyed the temple first. Okay. And then the Jews, the city was destroyed, the country was destroyed, the Jews were taken to Babylon, as you remember. Then they came back, and 70 years later, they rebuilt the temple during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. And that's what we read in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, about the return and rebuilding the temple. Okay, and that temple also lasted for 400 or 500 years, roughly 500 years, until Herod the Great. Herod the Great had a major problem. What was his major challenge?
He wasn't Jewish.
He had to please two powers, or two groups of people, the Romans, because they appointed him to rule, to be the king, and he had to please his Jewish subjects, because they were not quite happy to him to be the king. Okay. Whom do you think is easier to please, the Romans or the Jews? I think the Romans. That's definitely my opinion. Okay. But we have to remember this, that Herod the Great was able to accumulate a very strong economic power, lots of money. So what was Herod?
Trade from Caesarea.
From Caesarea, the port in Caesarea. The port in Caesarea made him very wealthy. You might remember from American history,
New York City.
Mr. Onassis, remember? Right? Shipping made him very wealthy. Okay, so that's what happened to Herod the Great. Became very wealthy. He had economic power. With this, he could please the Romans. And by doing that, he could have military power and administrative power. Romans supplied to him a possibility of administrative power and the military power. Money, administration, and military. And there's one thing missing. Religion. Yeah, religion is missing. That was his major challenge, and he knew that. And in order to facilitate his religious control, he decided to make the temple a big business. Make it larger. Make it big. Okay? And we are standing on a platform that was extended from the mosque over there. It was extended to the south. And the platform was built to make this place bigger so more people can come. And guess what? Everybody who comes needs to do what?
Pay.
You have to bring the tax, to pay the tax. So that's the tax plus the sacrifice costs lots of money, right? It's a big business. Big business.
So this is the People's Court area, or?
We'll come to this in just a second. All right, so what he built this big platform, 32 acres. 32 acres platform, and that's what you see. You can see we came from the western side. You looked a little bit on the western wall, so that's the west. We came from there. This is south. You can see the end on the south. Can you see the end on the east? Right, you can see the end of the east, and the only thing that you cannot see, the north, because it's a little higher. We will see that in a little bit. The northern boundary, the northern end of this platform that Herod the Great built, 32 acres platform that he built. What's the idea? To bring the Jews and non-Jews as well No. And that's exactly what Herod the Great did. He achieved this big benefit in business. It's a little bit difficult to know exactly where things were because nothing is left to us from that time period that Herod the Great built. Jesus would be here in the peak of the functioning of this temple. The peak of the functioning of this temple. Right? But it didn't function long. Jesus predicted that the temple will be destroyed, and it was, and we know when, 70 AD, during the big war. So everything was leveled down, and there's nothing left except the platform itself. So if you ask me about any building, any arch or structure or anything that is after the Roman destruction for sure, most likely after the Crusaders' presence here. Except maybe a couple of, can you see a few capitals? Capitals there. You can see some ancient capitals, and that would be part of the columns that supported the massive roof here, most likely known as the porch or portico of Solomon. Nothing to do with Solomon, just the name. Just the name, okay? Big public area where people could gather under the shade, protected from the rain or from the sun. And most likely that's the area where Jesus knocked off the money changers. Most likely. Which this area then in this case would be called the court of the Gentiles. Most likely. But we don't know the boundaries where the court will end and the other court will start. What's the other court? Well, the court of Israel, where the non-Jews were not allowed. This is reflected in the New Testament as well. If you remember, Paul was arrested. What was the ground for his arrest? That he brought the non-Jews, his friends, Greek-speaking friends, to where they were not allowed to trespass. And the punishment for that is severe. It's death punishment. Okay? And they started to beat him, if you remember. And Paul started to cry, help, help. Nobody came to help. And the Roman garrison came and when he said he was a Roman citizen. All right, so that's somewhere in this area as well. So most likely we are at the court of the Gentiles, but we can't know for sure. That's why the Orthodox Jews are not recommended to come here, because they can trespass into the areas that they were not allowed in ancient times. You see.
Here's some stills that I took of the dome after Mickey's teaching, followed by a panorama of the other part of the 32-acre platform that we didn't see earlier.
This is the north wall of the 32 acres in the mosque. You can see across the Kidron Valley. That's the graveyard over there. And then the Mount of Olives are behind the tree. There's where the sacrifices have been. And I'm under the dome.
Antonia Fortress, you've heard me talk about that, whether you remember or not. But it was located right here on this corner. This is the northwest corner. You see this? Remember when Paul was arrested, they took him up the steps, and at the top of the steps he turned to the guy and he said, "Can I speak to the crowd?" And from the top of the steps, with a great massive crowd out here trying to kill him, standing away, Paul addressed them in 3 seconds. Remember all that?
Yeah.
That was right here on this corner. This is the fortress into which where Pilate was. It's the fortress where Jesus, at one point, was brought into trial. So it was right off this corner. I just want you to orient and see where you are. And I've been telling you this story about the Temple Mount, Great Court of the Gentiles. I've been walking through it. and that's where the Antonia Fortress was located, right on this corner.
We left the Temple Mount on our way to the Via Dolorosa, which is part 2 of today's video.
And the Temple Mount was a historical and archaeological site. We know that's where the temple was in the days of Jesus, and that's what we went there. Now, we will deal more with the tradition. Why is that? We think we know where Jesus was arrested, and that was here, in this area, not in this building, because this building is 19th century building. But somewhere in this area where the fortress of Antonia was. Mark Antony. So the fortress is named after Mark Antony. And that's where Jesus was, this is where Jesus was interrogated by Pontius Pilate. And then from here, he was condemned and taken to execution on the hill called the Skull. In Hebrew, Golgotha, which corrupted into Golgotha, okay? Or in Latin, Calvaria, Calvary. The same thing in two different languages, Hebrew and Latin. Okay? And we don't know where that is. Is it important or is it not important? I think what is important is not the place where Jesus was crucified, but the fact that he's not in the tomb anymore. So we will see with that. We don't know where that happened. There are two places today. One for the Catholic Church and one for the Protestant Church. So you have to make your decision very quickly whether Jesus was Protestant or Catholic. But on a serious note, we don't know where that happened, and that is why I don't know how or where to take you to, or the route to take you to, since I don't know where to go. Okay? That is why, historically, I don't know where Jesus carried his cross. Is this clear? So what we will do, we will walk on what his traditional Catholic liturgy is to Golgotha. Right? It's more to remember than to know for sure where this happened.
So in part 2, we walked the traditional route, the Via Dolorosa. We then walked the Via Dolorosa on our way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We had a chance to peek in at some of the shops on our way, look at some of the food that was available for sale, and then made our way to the church, which is really owned by 4 different denominations, all claiming certain areas within the church to be theirs. Nobody can touch anything that's in place, including the ladder that you see on the wall. This is the traditional site, the Catholic view. It's not the view that I personally hold. Had a chance to spend some time in the Jewish quarter, did a little bit of shopping, visited a great bookstore, and never felt more safe, actually. After lunch, we walked under the Western Wall. The picture that you see here is a representation of the wall. On the far right is where we started. We walked all the way to the far left, which would be the Antonia Fortress, and where the reservoir we ended up in exists. The archaeology that we saw was amazing, and we had to walk a very, very long way through some narrow passages to get from one end to the other, and we finally then got to the cistern. Our last stop of the day was the Pool of Bethesda. This is a pool located outside of the Sheep Gate in Jerusalem, where Jesus healed a paralyzed man who was not able to get down to the water to be healed. Jesus noticed the man lying there. He asked him if he wanted to be healed. And then Jesus then later said, "Get up, pick up your bed, and walk." Tomorrow's day 2 in Jerusalem, and here's a look ahead at what we're going to be visiting.